Okay, cool. So, yeah, hopefully some more people will join us while we're just going through the housekeeping side of things. But yeah, just to touch on how we're going to run today. Within the Zoom functions, you have sort of a Q&A, and you also have the chat. If we can use the chat, if you have any sound or video problems, and the wonderful Katie will be able to pick up on that. If you do have any questions, please add in the Q&A part, and we will pick up those questions towards the end, and we'll bring in one of our researchers, Bethany, who will be able to sort of, to be honest, give you a much better answer than I ever could. Other bits of housekeeping, we'll be sending the recording and all the assets to all the attendees. Within that email, you'll also have a code which will allow you to download our Wave 4 of navigating changing options. Throughout this presentation, we'll be going into a lot of the detail within NCO 4, and this just allow you to have the full report to peruse at your leisure. And yeah, finally, obligatory Zoom joke: if you hear a fire alarm, it's your own. Please get out of the house. All right. And then no one left at that. That's brilliant. Cool. All right. So we'll crack on. So firstly, who are we? So I'm Paul. I'm the sales director here at the Student Room. I've been working HE in some capacity, be it at media, ad agencies, or alongside student unions for roughly 15 years. Love being here at TSR. It's an amazing organization, and the support that we give to, particularly through Mhairi, to support young people is a really inspiring thing, and something that's just kept me constantly in love with TSR. And what we'll see sort of throughout all of this is just a reflection of all of the needs and requirements for young people, and how we as an organization, but also yourselves, can help support young people through what has been a difficult time. Mhairi.
Hello, good morning everyone. My name is Mhairi Underwood. I'm the head of Student Voice and Diversity at the Student Room. I've worked at TSR for about 4.5 years now, and I joined as a community and volunteer manager, and I looked after kind of the life around learning part of the site, so all around things to do with health and relationships, mental health, also, you know, chat and community, all of those bits and bobs. I was head of community for around 3 years, and now I've been really excited to take on this newly created role that I'm in at the moment, where I have the immense privilege of being on the site every day and talking to students and hearing what's going on for them, including kind of the biggest challenges that they're facing at the moment. And let's be honest, in the past 18 months, that's been pretty huge. And I also get to work with some incredible organizations in terms of bringing sort of what students are saying and making sure that students are being heard in the rooms that they should be heard in. So I really enjoy that part of my work. I used to be a secondary school teacher and a head of year as well. So really, students are just kind of my whole thing. And yeah, I'm really passionate about working to do things that will support them. And that includes sharing all this information with people like yourselves, so that I know you're all very passionate about supporting students as well. So I'm really glad that we can take you through some of the research that we've been working on today. So I want to tell you a little bit about the Student Room in general. Hopefully most of you do kind of know who we are and what we're about by now, but just in case, we are the UK's largest online student community, and we've been around for about 20 years now. So we're probably, I suppose, a bit of a dinosaur in that space. But what that means is we've been really fortunate to continue supporting students for such a long time. TSR has always been a place for support and advice, for that peer-to-peer connection, and really for reassurance. I think a lot of students come to the Student Room wanting to know that they're not alone, that they're not weird, that people like them have been there before. And obviously during the pandemic, well, none of us have ever been here before, but we really saw the value of that peer-to-peer connection in terms of navigating what's been a really challenging time for young people. And we're really passionate about just helping young people to make the best decisions for them when it comes to their future, so that they can reach whatever their potential is. And yeah, we want to actually introduce you to some students in a moment as well, who are going to help share what the past 18 months have been like for them. I just wanted to explain a bit about the research that we're going to be going through today, which Paul has talked about a little bit already. So we're going to be speaking about our Navigating Changing Options report. which is a really cool piece of in-depth research that we've been doing the whole way through the pandemic. So this is wave 4. And the field work for this was done through February and March of this year. We're specifically looking at undergrad students in this session, but we will also be hearing from some year 13s on our student panel as well. I also just wanted to mention that we will also be talking about some snap polls that we run in our TSR community. These are just polls, but they're really good moment in time kind of temperature checks on the key issues that are impacting students at that time. This year we've done over 40 polls already, and we've had over 30,000 votes in those polls so far. So they really are kind of a good way to hear from students in terms of what's going on for them in the moment. So I just want to introduce you to our student panel next up. So we're going to be hearing from these guys throughout the presentation. So Cara is in year 13. We've got James, who's in year 13 also, and then we've got Alex, who is a final year student. So we'll be hearing from them as we go. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a kind of situate us a little bit in terms of how a student's feeling generally at the moment. There's a lot of conversation in the media at the moment about the impact of the pandemic on young people, especially in relation to educational attainment. But what we've learned through the past 18 months is that while education is obviously a core foundation of students' experience, the impacts of the pandemic on young people are just so much more wide-reaching. I wanted to talk a little bit about some recent research about the impacts of the pandemic, some kind of broader research. There's been the Zoe COVID symptom study, which I'm sure a lot of you will have heard about already, which has had about 4.6 million participants. And in their findings about the impact of the pandemic on mental health, they identified that young people, so 16 to 24 years of age, have been disproportionately impacted compared to older age groups throughout the pandemic. And that same sentiment is echoed through all sorts of research that's been coming out since the pandemic. I thought it was really interesting to note some of the things that they spoke about in relation to that impact on mental health. They talk about impacted sleep and loneliness, the psychological impact of being more reliant on their peer groups, but at the same time separated from them at that really key developmental time in their lives. Interestingly, they said that those in rural areas are impacted more than those in urban areas, which is actually the opposite to older people. And something that really stuck with me was when they said the pandemic has amplified inequality. So, and I'm sure this is something that you've seen coming up in your own work, in terms of those students who may have been experiencing challenges or disadvantage before the pandemic, that there's a real possibility that that may have been amplified as a result of the pandemic. They also talked about the fact that uncertainty is the pollen for anxiety. And I think that that just really epitomizes students' experience in the past 18 months and many of our experiences in the past 18 months, but especially for young people at a time when you do want to be pretty certain in your life, when so much is changing. It's been really difficult for young people to find that certainty. We're going to talk about that a little bit as we go through this presentation today. So for now, let's hear a little bit about what Cara and Alex have to share in terms of how they've been finding things. I think it's really interesting to hear about that the combination of factors that are impacting them at the moment.
I've just finished year 13 and the challenges this year have been immense and manifold. There's been challenges on my social life in the aspect of who I can go to if I have problems with my mental health or just making contact with friends more. I've struggled to manage my study time and revision time. I've also suffered from burnout, and I also feel like I've had a lack of teacher connection while I had online lessons too.
I'm currently in my final year at university, and it's been especially challenging this past year socially because it's very easy to isolate when you're not seeing people every day like you normally would. And I'm autistic, so I found that especially difficult to kind of engage socially when everything's over the internet.
Yeah, really interesting to hear, as I say, about that. It's not just one thing that's going on for students. There's so much that was happening in terms of all the things that had changed in their lives. We actually ran a poll in the TSR community asking what factors were impacting their mental health the most. We ran this poll. These results are from April of 2021, so this year. And we also ran the same poll in April of 2020. Both times the poll received about 5,000 votes, and you can see here the top 5 factors that were impacting mental health. Uncertainty around education, This lack of purpose and motivation is a theme that we're going to see coming up as we go through the presentation today. It's something that we're seeing kind of across the board in relation to what students have been experiencing. Uncertainty around future career prospects, again, this comes up a lot, and we'll definitely be speaking about that as we go through today. This lack of confidence in making big life decisions and worry about missed opportunities during the pandemic were interesting. They were new ones that we added in April this year as a result of some conversation that we'd been seeing around the forums. And lots of students were feeling that kind of the things that they were missing out on was really challenging, and it also kind of left them with this lack of confidence in terms of those really big decisions that they were trying to make, and this kind of I guess paralysis in decision making when it was very difficult for them to be certain about much really. We're actually running this same poll again right now on the site, and so it's going to be really interesting to see how the outcome now that restrictions have changed a little bit. So we'll be talking about that, I guess, in the future once that poll has finished running. Let's talk now a little bit about our Navigating Changing Options report specifically, and specifically those current university students. So for them, the worry was real, with almost 100% of students worrying about something, and generally about 5 or 6 things at once. So 74% of first years were worried about making friends, and that's a theme that we see coming up across the board as well. We also see that with the year 13s who are about to start university in September, that being a worry in terms of making friends where some things may still be online. 82% said motivating myself to study was a big worry for them. Again, that kind of motivation factor is something that really bothers students. And nearly half said future employability was a big worry for them. And as I say, that kind of comes up through multiple points of the research today. Delving beyond worry in general and kind of the mental health impact on undergrad students, we had 48% of respondents describe their pre-COVID mental health as good or very good, while 21% said their pre-COVID mental health was poor or very poor. But at the time of this survey, just 17% said their mental health was good or very good, while 48% described it as poor or very poor. So we're seeing almost a total flip there in terms of how students were describing their mental health. Now, we know that one of the key factors when it comes to wellbeing is a support network, but for almost half of university students, they didn't feel like they had this. So yeah, 49% said they didn't feel they had a support network to reach out to. 47% felt they knew how to connect with course mates, so more than half felt like they didn't. And 34% said that they could cope with the uncertainty. So that uncertainty, again, sort of really having that, that negative impact on students there. The NCO report also showed that most students didn't think the government was doing enough to support them. And you can see some of their thoughts there on the screen. Interestingly, this sentiment is also echoed by younger students. In a poll we did in 2020, 70% of the then year 10s and 12s said that they felt forgotten by the government. Those year 12s are now the students who will be beginning university in September. So it's important to remember that this feeling of being unsupported by the government isn't specific to undergrads, and it's entirely possible that the impact of this break in trust might continue to impact on students. I'm going to pass over to Paul now, who's going to talk a bit about how students have felt about how universities have approached the pandemic.
Amazing, thanks, Mhairi. So yeah, as you said, what did students think about universities' approach to the pandemic? Firstly, there's quite a lot of positives. So while respondents were generally happiest with teaching and learning and how universities managed the risks of COVID-19, so we've got here 87% of respondents were happy with how universities had managed the risk of COVID-19. 73% were happy with teaching and learning. I think so, and this is a theme that kind of runs throughout. When it comes to HEIs, students are really quite impressed with how quickly and how just the ability for universities to pivot into this sort of new world that's existed for the last 18 months. And there's quite a lot of respect that kind of comes out of that and how challenging that would have been. And yeah, I think so, like as an extension from the student room and what we see for all the students that we help support, we kind of extend our thanks to all universities as well for the role that you've played in that. I think so, yeah, to all of our colleagues across the sector, it's been super tough, but the stats kind of bear out that You've done a pretty amazing job on so many difficult things. So yeah, teaching and learning and managing the crisis, really, really good marks. People are super impressed. And that's something that we should all be immensely proud of as a sector. However, there were areas of challenge. So the majority were not happy with how their university was helping them to connect with other students. So only 37% here were happy around that. And also connections with future employers. That's particularly for current students. And that is a trend that both of those actually are trends that come out repeatedly. This feeling of not enough is being done to connect them with their peers either at university, or if you're applying, people who are already at the institution you're potentially interested in attending to, big opportunity there. But also that connections with employees comes out throughout the survey. So a bit more here on university comms. Once again, COVID measures were clear, but interestingly, how to cope with COVID wasn't. So while universities appear to be conveying information about self-isolation and social distancing really quite well, there appeared to be a lack of information when it comes to student support and how to cope during lockdown. So yeah, 61% felt that this information was conveyed really well. And that information around sort of like assessment in particular and grading was communicated really well. But under half of final year students felt that information about how their final year degree results would be calculated was communicated well. And finally, only 38% of people felt that they were communicated well with when it comes to coping with lockdown. So once again, this is a really great comms opportunity for you, particularly as we come into the clearing period. And you're already doing this great job around communicating what you can do around, so like I said, like self-isolation, what life on campus might be like, but this more sort of social aspect around how to cope with sort of living in sort of like a post-COVID world would be super beneficial to these students. So go back to the point I made earlier. So the vast majority of students know that sort of their universities are doing the very best for them. So that being said, there are a couple of relatively probably unsurprising stats that came out. So only 1 in 5 felt they were getting value for money for their tuition, and only 1 in 10 felt they were getting value for money for their university experience. As I said, these could be some pretty sort of damning statistics, but the flip side of this is positively, 70% of respondents felt their university was doing the best it could under the circumstances. And yeah, once again, just testament to the amazing work done by the sector. But there is this sort of genuine feeling around, am I getting value for money for my tuition? Most people think not. Am I getting value for money for my university experience? Once again, even more think that isn't the case. And as we think about the generation moving from year 13 now into first year, is that another thing that could be communicated about around, this is what we're going to be doing to enhance your student experience come September. But yeah, despite some of those negative statistics, there are a lot of positivity. So 73% of all respondents were happy on their university course. However, this was leaving around 27% of people who were not. 82% of first year respondents were glad they'd attended university. However, this did change quite a bit for those who'd gone to university through clearing, and a lower proportion of people were happy on their course, only 35% versus 73%, although they'd attended university, and that's 58% of clearing applicants were happy that they'd gone to university versus 82% of the total respondent base. So once again, if we think about sort of how this could impact university comms, it's differentiate those two audiences. They will probably have different needs. So how you're communicating to your non-clearing applicants and how you communicate to your clearing applicants, there might be some additional work that is required on those clearing applicants to ensure that that transition is smoother, is easier, and the onboarding into university is a little more tailored to their needs and possible mindset. So I just want to take a moment now to share some insight into the students who are once again due to be starting in September. And this data is taken from polls run within our community that Mhairi discussed earlier. So in January, when schools were closed for most of students again, 43% said they didn't have what they needed to succeed in home learning. This is up compared to March last year when we asked a very similar question, where it's 28%. I think part of that might be that sort of in March 2020, people might not have known what they needed to know to be able to sort of work in a hybrid way, be it sort of actually professionally or at school. And when we ran this poll again in January, people were very clear, actually, I don't have what I need. In a poll of almost 1,000 students in last May, we found that only 23% of students said they felt their grades would be fair, and about half said they didn't feel they'd be fair, while 27% were unsure. So there's quite a bit of negativity, and this might link back to what Mhairi talked about earlier with the sort of the lack of trust or feeling ignored by the government, which is then sort of feeding into this feeling, this sort of I'm not going to be treated fairly when it comes to grading. And finally, in a community poll just about sort of 5 weeks ago now, we found the vast majority of students feel their future will be impacted by receiving teacher-assessed grades, and 43% felt the biggest worry was that it will also negatively impact their chance of getting into university or college. And that is driven by a feeling that the teacher-assessed grades will be perceived of lower worth than normal A-levels and seen as lesser. And that view was shared by 1 in 5 or 20% of respondents. Cool, so staying with year 13s, let's talk about how they're finding their experience of applying to university. So we all know what a pivotal time this is for universities to make a really positive impact on students. And for students, this often feels like the biggest decision they've had to make in their lives so far to date. So for the multiple cohorts impacted by the pandemic, we all know how many additional hurdles this has thrown in for them. And what we found out throughout navigating changing options wave 4 was that COVID-19 impacted university choices for around 1 in 5 of 2021 entry respondents. They were severely motivated by a lack of confidence in getting the grades they needed and concerns about how future COVID outbreaks would be handled by the universities they were considering. Let's just jump into some of those stats. So, as I said, 1 in 5 respondents felt that COVID-19 had impacted their university choice. Comments from our users also suggested that people were considering staying closer to home, but crucially not necessarily at home. And a lot of that was driven by a desire to sort of be able to get back home quicker should there be sort of further lockdowns. Interestingly though, so that desire to sort of be close to home but not at home was not shared by their parents, where we found that so 27% of parents were encouraging our respondents to stay close to home, while a further 9% wanted them to actually physically stay at home. Bear with me, sorry. Yeah, 12% of 2021 entry and 18% of 2022 entry respondents said their subject choices had been impacted, and 59% of 2021 entry and 67% of 2022 entry felt they were quite concerned or very concerned about employability. And if we look at this pre-pandemic, that was just 29% of respondents for 2021 entry, and 34% for 2022 entry were concerned about this fact. So once again, if we think about sort of employee comms, education comms for this clearing cohort, but also looking forward for 2022 entry, that employability element is really, really important to them. And if we could sort of start getting that into our comms more and more frequently, hopefully we should see this level of anxiety around, so what does my future post university look like, start to come down. Cool, so that's enough from me and navigating changing options. Let's hear from Cara.
I really wish universities would tell me a less glamorized view of their university, one that seems more honest. And in my opinion, those that didn't show certain aspects of their student life, such as student Q&As, also seem to have something to hide and also kind of put me off applying there. And I also felt that taster lectures were absolutely amazing and helpful, and student Q&As was so insightful to give me more insight into a university. The biggest challenge for me while looking at universities was trying to find optional modules or getting student opinions with regards to my courses, and that where I couldn't find a lot of optional modules really put me off some of the courses because I really would have loved to see them. And I would also have loved to see more openly available statistics on future employability with regards to student outcomes. And the whole researching universities experience as a whole was so stressful due to this lack of information.
That point there made by Cara is also further backed up in NCO, where we found that about 57% of 2021 entry respondents felt they didn't have enough information to be able to select their firm or insurance choice. So there's this real information gap felt by these people.
The biggest challenge for me.
While the communication which I've been given from universities is useful, I would personally much prefer to have content which is much more tailored towards my subject, as well as my experience of being like a first uni student. Therefore, I would much prefer if universities would tell me like how are other students coping with the subject, as well as like information from the lecturers themselves, as well as other students within the subject that's doing it right now.
Cool. And once again, so what James said there is further backed up within an NCO, where we found that 46% of respondents didn't feel like they had all the information required for their course to really make a decision on that course, let alone the university. And then only 48% felt they'd heard enough from current students on the course. And yeah, this feeling of connectivity and sort of being able to interact with current students to sort of get a truer picture of the institution and particularly the course comes out time and time again.
For me, the biggest influencer in my application process was my mum. She's the one who went with me on all of the open days, and being at the open days themselves was the most helpful part because that's what really made me feel like I would fit in at the university where I ended up going. I found researching communications to be quite frustrating. It's really university wasn't brilliant. As a non-binary student, it was really difficult to know who to talk to about things like name and assigned gender on official documents and things like that. So I think that's something that they could really improve on.
Now is this video.
Difficult to try and keep track of. Found researching universities to be quite frustrating. It's really difficult to try and keep track of what scholarships are on offer and where you can get bursaries and where doesn't give bursaries. So I think it would be nice to have some kind of central place where you can compare all of the universities and the financial options they give you.
Okay, cool. So just going to another poll that we ran with our community, it's about 2 months ago now. We found that the vast majority of students still need information from their universities to help them to make that informed choice. So a couple of verbatim quotes here. I feel like I haven't had the opportunity to sample university life. That kind of came out once again in some of the quotes from the student panel, and this desire to get back into open days in particular, or so hear more from students. All the events have done that be focused purely on information rather than experiences. So I feel like I know the universities, but I can't picture what it'll be like for me to be there. And yeah, once again, so they want to feel a part of your institutions. So how in your comms, be it for 2022 entrants or as we go into the clearing period, can this start to come out where sort of it's creating more of a feeling of belonging and connectivity between an applicant and your institution. Cool, so just I'm going to touch very briefly on final year students. So another group of students that are facing quite a big decision is these final year students, and crucially they might be considering postgrad courses. So what we started to see is that the future of employability is a real huge concern for these students. Yes, and this is particularly final year students, where 91% of them are concerned about getting a job after they graduate. Mhairi will talk more about this in a minute. And for those current undergrads who are looking to enter a postgrad course, it seems there is a real lack of awareness and lots of room for universities to increase this awareness and support around what postgraduate opportunities exist out there, which is we kind of see it with almost any recession or jobs crunch, where there's a big increase in postgrad uptake. And on the student room, we're seeing at the moment a significant increase in our postgraduate traffic. So that trend is likely to happen over the coming years. But for students, be they final year students or current undergrads, there's a real lack of knowledge on what opportunities could exist for them, be they particularly around employability, but also postgrad opportunities as well. Mhairi, over to you.
Cool, thanks, Paul. So I want to talk a little bit about the future, and that is a bit of a weird thing to consider at the moment still, although lockdown restrictions have eased a lot. It's a bit of a mixed bag from students. So let me take you through some of the different perspectives we're seeing. So as Paul's been saying, concern about future employability has almost doubled since the pandemic, and it's even more so for final year students who are facing entering a really uncertain workforce. This feeling impacts younger students as well, though, and for some, it's making it difficult to feel certain about their next steps in their career, if the field that they envisage being in is a lot less certain now. Let's hear a little bit from Cara about how she's feeling about the future.
About the future, the following words come to mind, that being rocky and uncertain. And I think this just highlights how all of us students are currently feeling due to the lack of uncertainty both around our futures and our grades, and even just the future of the job market as well. After I finish college, I plan to go to uni to work as much as I can, as I lost my job over COVID, and to also travel and try and gain work experience during that I've missed. About the future, the following words.
Interesting to hear Cara note there that she lost her job during the pandemic, and I know that we've seen in various sort of events I've been to a lot of concern in terms of the financial implications of the pandemic on young people as well, so I know that'll be on their mind too. Paul spoke a little bit about those considering postgrad courses already today. We have noticed a trend on TSR of increasing discussions in our postgrad forum. This was a little while ago, and we wondered whether the pandemic had caused a change in terms of how people were thinking about postgrad. So in a poll of 250 community members in February this year, 38% of those considering a postgrad course said it had always been their plan. But for those who weren't already planning on postgrad, the reasons that they now are were really related to the pandemic. So 25% of them wanted to make themselves more employable because of the difficult job market. 10% were newly completed undergrads who didn't want to enter the job market during a pandemic. 10% were also reevaluating their career path because of the pandemic. And then at 7% for both, we saw those who'd lost their jobs in the pandemic and those who wanted to travel but couldn't. And we're seeing a really interesting sort of bit of conversation around this idea of kind of considering what students really want to be doing in their futures. I think for a lot of people, the pandemic has really brought things into sort of a sharp focus. So it's interesting to see what their choices or how their choices are being affected by that. So let's hear a little bit from Alex, who is in their final year of uni.
After I graduate, I'm going to continue my studies, and I've actually won a welcome studentship to continue and study my master's, and then hopefully do a PhD and even a research career. So I feel quite lucky in that way, because I know that a lot of other people don't really know what's going to be happening because of COVID.
It's really nice to see Alex's excitement about their future here. And it's really cool in a poll we've run recently on the site to see that although a lot of students are nervous about starting university in September, there's still just a huge amount of excitement about taking that next step in their lives. And I think a lot of excitement to look forward to something that might feel like a bit more normal after what's been a really difficult time. So yeah, lots of positive stuff when thinking about the future as well. Let's hear a little bit more from James and Cara.
I am planning to move away closer to my university within private housing with a couple of my friends. And personally, I am excited for this because while it will be very interesting to get a hold of the typical idea of living by yourself, I think it's also going to be very fun just having free time and just more free space than normal compared to living at home.
Yeah, really nice there to hear those sort of those things that students before the pandemic were probably excited and nervous about as well. So while we're considering a lot of the impact of the pandemic, I think we're going to see a lot of those sort of normal first year things coming up for students as well.
Way for university with the potential to commute possibly in second year, and I personally am really excited for the opportunities that it's going to bring, but also slightly terrified for the transition itself. When I think about moving away to university, certain words come to mind, such as the idea of a fresh start and a new place to explore, but also the idea of a foreign territory that I'm not yet comfortable with, and imposter syndrome. I am really excited to start university because of the new opportunities and challenges that it brings, that I feel like I'm now ready to take the next chapter in my life and become more independent, and especially with regards to travelling and cooking and managing budgets, etc. However, I am also nervous about having to almost start again with regards to socialising and make completely new friends and find new people to talk to.
I think that point that Cara makes there around imposter syndrome is a really interesting one. It's something I've been speaking with as part of the Student Futures Commission as well, around these students who are receiving grades in an altered way, that may go on to continue impacting them. We've heard from first year students saying things around the fact that having received the grades the way they did last year has continued to impact them in terms of their mental health and their kind of perception of self. Even though they've kind of gotten through their first year of university. And I think that's probably something to keep in mind for these year 13 students who are going to be coming through having received those teacher assessed grades that Paul was talking about earlier, that a lot of them do feel are going to negatively impact them. So I think there's definitely kind of a support piece and a confidence building piece there as well. So we've learned a lot about how students are feeling, what it's like to apply to university during a pandemic, the good and the bad of navigating COVID-19 as a student. And now it's time to hear what they need from here. So we all know the pandemic isn't over, although it feels like we might be getting there slowly, but students know that too. So I want to hand over to our student panel to share their recommendations on how universities can really support them during this time.
Now I've made my choice, I would like the university to send me emails about accommodation and societies that are available there, also information about open days or taster lectures, and also it would be amazing if they would allow me to connect with other students on the same course as me, for example through a Facebook group. And I would also really love to know more information about a certain research opportunity that a university has, etc. For me, it is important to have accessible support for people with disabilities, both with regards to study-wise and the information and opportunities available to them, as well as support, but also for accommodation purposes and what accommodation is disability friendly, and also how the application process works for students with disabilities, because the transition itself can be so difficult and scary, let alone without having these extra burdens and worries to have to take care of. Universities such as tours would be really easily contactable and quickly, and also really important that I think a lot of unis aren't that great at is making sure that they are clear in their website and the content available on their website. So just having clear optional modules, etc., and research opportunities. A messy website or one that just leads you around in circles is an absolute nightmare, and also put me off applying to certain universities as well.
For me, I think it's really important to have support regarding the well-being of students, since moving to uni might be a very momentous occasion for them and it might be hard for them to cope. And for me personally, I would love to have support regarding managing budgets and finances during post-18 education, since it might be hard for some students to do this since they don't have the information or guidance to take care of this.
Universities need to make sure that they're learning their lessons from COVID and make sure to keep the good things that have come out of this year, like things being more accessible through being online. And I think that's the most important thing. I would like universities to be telling me basically what's going on. It would be really nice to have some certainty in this time about what the year is going to look like. Are we going to be online? Are we going to be in person? I think just knowing would make it a lot easier. I think university next year will be pretty much back to normal. I'm hoping, fingers crossed. I'm not sure though. It's really an unknown for me.
It's interesting on a couple of levels, what Alex is saying there. In terms of keeping some part of lockdown life, 94% of students during our NCO Wave 4 agreed with Alex about that, and they were talking about the top 3 benefits being able to save a bit more money than usual, having the flexibility to work and study from home if they want to, and having the flexibility to work or study at a time that's convenient to them. It's also really interesting what they were saying around the information about what university is going to be like. This is still sort of a real concern for students at the moment, and we see conversation about it on TSR quite regularly in terms of students wondering sort of what is going to be the case when it comes to things like freshers and how their year is really going to look in terms of whether they'll be online or at home or a combination. So I think, yeah, there's definitely sort of a need for some transparency there for students. And I imagine, you know, once results day has come along and they know a little bit more about where they're definitely going, I'm sure you've all got some great plans in terms of your comms for them at that time. So I'm just going to hand back over to Paul for a few final thoughts.
Awesome, thanks, Mhairi. Yeah, so listen to understand, communicate to connect, be it through the research we conduct through TSR Insight or research you can conduct yourselves from your own student body. There's so many ways that we can listen to young people, be they applicants, pre-applicants, current students, or our alumni. But what's really important then is we take that insight and we use it to be able to build that connection and communicate really effectively to this cohort, particularly given the very unique challenges that they have faced. So yeah, if there's five things to take away from what students are telling us that can start to be weaved through your comms, I think this would be sort of super useful for you, but also really useful for your intended audience. So provide information on mental health and well-being support. It's crucial for young people at the moment. And I think this is moving to something that isn't going to make you stand out anymore, but will just be a hygiene factor of something you need to be able to talk about. So yeah, how can that start weaving through your comms even before someone comes through the university gates? Facilitate these connections between your prospective students and your current students. It comes out from the panel, and it certainly comes out from NCO that connection is really required to help people to make a really informed decision. And it doesn't seem like that's happening a great deal. So that is something I think can really help you stand out from your competitors. Talk holistically. So it's not just about the course, not just about the institution, but if you can give support what's happening with accommodation, university life. I think we heard Cara talking about sort of what societies and sports teams and stuff that could be joined. That's really important. The financial side of things is also really important as well. So if we can get this more holistic, rounded approach, that's when I think we reflect back on one of the quotes earlier. I seem to know all the information about the university, but I can't really quite picture myself there. And I think it's this holistic approach that can start to round yourself out. Yeah, employability is super high on this cohort's agenda. Talk about it. And yeah, finally, there have been some positive changes brought about due to COVID, which can sound just really weird to say, but it's true. And whether that's sort of for ourselves as people in the workforce and how it's impacted our work life, the additional flexibility that's come in there, that's also felt by young people and students as well. So, and it's mentioned by the panel, and it also comes out with an NCO. So don't lose sight of that. Think about how hybrid could work. Open days in particular, people are desperate to be able to get back onto campus, but virtual open days as well is incredibly accessible and removes a barrier to entry for something that could be a very expensive thing to do if you take into account sort of trains, hotels, sort of wanting your parents to sort of be able to come along on campus, which might not be possible for all people. So this hybrid approach, I think, is hopefully here to stay, be it for young people or for us in the workforce. Cool. All right, I'll stop screen sharing and we will go on to any questions. But firstly, thank you very, very much. All right, let's have a look at Q&A, which all looks like they were answered. Beth, you've been brilliant answering these as we've gone through. In which case, are there any further questions that you'd like to sort of put to us / mainly Beth? There's a question here actually. Do the stats about final year students receiving for about PGT courses refer to courses from their own uni or just any university? Mhairi, I think I need to defer to you on that one, but I think that might be from any university.
I think Beth popped an answer in the chat there actually. The question for the wording for the question was thinking about your options after graduation, has your university provided you with information about each of the following? So that one was in relation to specific universities, but I also spoke during the presentation about a poll that we had run, which was speaking about reasons why students might be considering PGT courses, and that was just general, like general university, general students. That was not specific to certain universities.
Right. Sarah has a question here. Do you have a specific stat on increasing PG traffic? I wish I could reel that off the top of my head, but there will be a bit of comms coming out from Katie in a week or so, specifically around PG traffic and some of the student sentiment that sort of that exists around that. So Sarah will make sure that you're included in those comms, and apologies that I don't have the number off the top of my head. I probably should.
I was also just going to add, just out of interest, that we spoke a little bit during the presentation about the 2022 cohort, and I think it's something that's really interesting to bear in mind. I think we may also have some comms going out about that, but I just want to point your attention to a poll that we ran a little while ago, which was asking year 12 sort of where they're at in terms of planning what they want to do after year 13. And what we saw from 260 votes was that 32% are actively researching unis, and almost 30% have already started their university applications. So, and lots are attending summer open days as well. So definitely something to bear in mind in terms of a lot of the learnings from that we presented in terms of today. Like year 12 are really thinking now. So hopefully some of what we've shared with you today will help you in terms of the comms that you're planning for those 2022 applicants as well.
Amazing. Are there any final questions? Awesome.
Oh, there's some more. Oh, there are some more questions here, Paul.
Oh yeah.
So Jack is asking, have students talked about their preference, whether they want to continue with virtual open days, or are we starting to see more requests for face-to-face open days as we come out of COVID-19 pandemic? It's a really good question. We did run a poll about this recently, and I'll try and grab that up in a moment, but we're seeing a lot of students who are really keen to do some real life stuff, really keen to get on campus and kind of explore, but also lots of students who still understand that may not be possible, depending on you know how things are going. To be fair, the poll that we ran was still when restrictions were quite strict, so it may have changed since then. But I definitely think that there is interest for real life events. I think it's a really good point that Paul made earlier, though, in relation to those students who may not be able to access real life events. And potentially something to bear in mind at the moment is the number of people over the UK who are having to self-isolate, for example. So it may be that continuing to have those virtual opportunities is still really pertinent, kind of regardless of face-to-face events.
We found as well in the NCO research that we've done that students do want both, the option to have both virtual open days and face-to-face open days. So they want a choice. They want to be able to pick and choose which they want to do as well. So I think giving students, if possible, giving students the choice of which they'd prefer is really important.
Awesome, thanks, Beth.
There's a question here, clearing can be quite stressful time for students. Do you have any advice on how to ease the anxiety for students during this period?
Oh yeah, it's so true. It is such a stressful time for students. We see it coming out on TSR all the time. We're working at the moment in terms of our support for this year, and we have UCAS trained advisors who are on the site, helping students with their questions. And I love that you've asked this question, Leona, because I think it's a really important thing to talk about in terms of the mental health and well-being impact of results and clearing on students. And as Paul was talking about during the presentation, I think discussing those things with students is actually just really encouraging. We saw some stats recently from a poll that we ran, which was saying that only 5% of students think it's easy to get early intervention mental health support in their community. So not specific to their university, but regardless, I think it points to this idea that there's a belief that there's not much support for students. And I know it could be, services are really busy at the moment, but I think the more that universities can reach out and put their kind of metaphorical arm around students and acknowledge that this can be a really difficult time in terms of well-being is a really positive thing. Beyond that, in terms of practical things, I think just like answering questions as quickly and as efficiently and clearly as possible, because as you say, it can be a really anxious time and a really stressful time, and students may be feeling like they have to answer or have to make decisions really quickly and under pressure. So I think as much as, no university has never-ending resource, I think the ability to have those conversations with students to really talk to them and reassure them and give them the answers that they need, I think is probably the best support you could give.
I think to add that, what we see from the panelists in particular, is that a lot of anxiety can come from an information gap. So the more information that could be provided, particularly clearing students on what that the first months of university could look like, I think would be really, really useful. And once again, if there's that connectivity piece, is okay, you're now coming to us through clearing. Can we find a way of being able to link you up with another student who came to us in previous years, through clearing? Once again, to sort of just normalize the process and just help to understand that sort of it's not just you going through this and you're kind of not alone. But I think that information gap is really important, and how you can fill that and give as much certainty as possible in what is a relatively uncertain time. So everything obviously needs to be taken with a pinch of salt, but there probably is more certainty that we could be giving this cohort. This question here. Thank you for today and recommendation going forward. As most universities were providing information about the wider university experience, accommodation funding, etc., did students outline how they prefer to receive this information? I think, Beth, is there anything in NCO about sort of communication channels and preference?
I'll have a look into that for you and get back to you on that one.
Yeah, brilliant. So we'll try and find a way to get that answer to you, or look into how it can be baked into future waves. So another one from Sarah here about let's know more from students about how we can create that sense of belonging for students who can't make it to campus. Yeah, online events seem to be a real barrier in this sense, which is kind of backed up. Mhairi, Beth, what do you think?
Shall I have a start at that?
Please do.
I mean, I think, like you've highlighted, that it is a real challenge. It's a real challenge trying to, create a sense of community when that might only be possible online for some students. But I think students are really encouraged by the efforts that universities make in terms of creating a sense of community. And what keeps coming up time and again in research that we do, and research kind of across the board, is that ability to connect with current students on their course as well. And we heard it from the student panel today in terms of being able to speak to people, not just at their university, but people who are on their course. And at TSR, our whole community is peer-to-peer. And so we see all the time students reaching out to each other and just doing an incredible job of supporting one another. So I think finding ways to connect students who, potentially, second or third year students that you could connect with first years that are coming in on the course. But I think something else that's interesting in terms of that sense of belonging is we shouldn't forget about the students who will be starting second year in September. A lot of those students have spoken, and we spoke about it today, about the challenges that they've had in terms of connecting with their course mates, in terms of making friends, in terms of having a support network. And just because they're not in first year anymore, it doesn't mean that they won't continue to have those challenges if we don't go on to support them. And I think that's something that, I've again spoken about it in the Student Futures Commission, who'll be making recommendations shortly in terms of this connectedness and well-being, and the fact that first years are so important, but so are the second years, and that in terms of that connectedness, perhaps there's a bit of a double benefit there to be had in terms of introducing students to one another. Also, I just want to say briefly around the idea of online events. We're going to have a whole new cohort of students coming in September who we don't know about their access to technology. We don't know about their, we can't assume that they're digital natives. That term is so problematic. So it might be that there's also some support for students in terms of how to access and be part of online events rather than just assuming that they can. So yeah, making sure that support is going there. And I know, student engagement and support teams do so much work in that area already. So I imagine that's already on many people's radars. Beth, have you got any stats background to add?
I don't have the stats off the top of my head, but when we've done research about sort of open day experiences, one of the most important things for students is they want to speak to the academics who will be teaching them, and they want to speak to current students, and that gives them a really good idea more about what it will be like to be a student there. So things like sample lectures and things like that are really useful in terms of helping a student know what it will feel like to be a student at that university as well.
Awesome. Cheers, Beth. Cheers, Mhairi. And I think the final one here is mentioned earlier about students who are struggling socially and economically before COVID, and they're now experiencing even more difficulty with online learning and engagement. Any advice on how a uni can approach this?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it? I think it's a question that a lot of us are asking ourselves at the moment in terms of how do we make sure that those students can be supported. I'm no expert on university process and how each university will work differently, but as I was saying earlier, I know that every university has a really dedicated and hardworking student support and services team. And I know, having spoken to a lot of them recently, that this is massively on their radar already. I think a lot of the time it's about identifying those students who might need that support and ensuring that they know that it's available, encouraging things like disclosures on applications in relation to things like mental health, for example, could be a positive thing. Also, I really do wonder around, like we've seen on the forums over the past 18 months, so much conversation around well-being and access and those sorts of things, which I take as a real positive, because I think that there's a lot of self-awareness and a lot of really productive dialogue that's happening around the impacts of the pandemic. So there may be students who may not typically identify themselves as a student who may need support. So I think if it's possible to ensure that there are people who are trained, and it's not like everyone in universities doesn't already have enough to do, but if it's possible for those students to be identified quickly and have that support given to them as quickly as possible, I think that's a really positive step. But I can't pretend to have all the answers in terms of how do we kind of address what is a really big issue.
Beth, is there anything that that you'd like to add onto that as well?
No, but it's definitely something we can explore in future waves of the NCO research moving forward. Definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. Finally, if you think about breaking the two elements you mentioned down, so on the social side of things, I think you have an amazing resource, all of you kind of on campus in your student unions, and what can be done there. So in your sort of I guess the CRM journey, so post application, how can they have a greater prominence to sort of work on that sort of like the social aspect, whatever those sort of club societies may be. We obviously talked about sort of connectivity between other students. I think that's really important to help those who are struggling socially. And on this sort of like the economic side of things, it's just information, advice, and guidance. Once again, sort of be it through your CRM, bring it more prominence into your site, so how people can budget effectively. Plan their year, more information on sort of any funding opportunities that may exist. I think this is once again mentioned by the panel, particularly around things like bursaries. So I think sort of a lot of the information to support on the sort of like the social side of things or the economic side of things probably exists, but maybe what isn't happening is it isn't really coming to the fore either through sort of like the CRM journeys or post-application or in your wider marketing comms. But I think as Beth said, I think it'd be a really great thing for us to sort of drill down on that question. So yeah, thanks for asking that, Helen. I think it's a great one. Awesome. Any final questions? Brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much for taking an hour out of your super busy days to sort of listen to us, and most importantly, actually listen to our students. Yeah, their voice is really important. They don't feel them massively being heard, be it by sort of in particular by the government, but they are super grateful and really respectful of all the amazing hard work that you guys have done to support them over the last 18 months. Despite saying that, there obviously is more that we could do, all of us, to sort of to improve that comms, get some more information out, and sort of help kind of like bring that base level of anxiety that sort of everyone is feeling sort of down. But yeah, you're all doing an amazing job, and I just wish you all the very best clearing, which sounds like I'm wishing you the very best Christmas. I guess it's kind of our Christmas, isn't it? So happy clearing, guys. And yeah, and have an amazing rest of the day.